Hi, in this clip I'd just like to talk about my collection of vintage snares and snares that I take with me on various sessions, because I get some people asking questions when I post pics from sessions and gigs on Instagram and Facebook. So I thought I'd just go into my collection, why I have them. And with me here is my good friend Tristan from DrumAttic, who actually I bought some of these snares off, so thank you. So I'll start with this at this end, and obviously I'll talk about them and Tris can fill you in on the build qualities and designs and so on. This is a Slingerland. This is a Slingerland student model, aluminium, I do believe.
Where it is an aluminium?
14 by 5. I just find that, I think this one isn't as popular as an acrylite, I would say.
No.
I don't know if that's true, but I like acrylites as well, don't get me wrong. I'm a big Ludwig vintage Ludwig fan. But when I'm recording, and when I have recorded with this drum, it just seems to sit in the track in a certain style of music better than probably even the 400 sometimes. Because you could look at this as being a runt of the litter snare, really, because it's a student model. But you know what, as you'll see in a minute, I love the student model ranges. So it's worth checking out. So what would you say about this drum then, build-wise?
Well, like you say, it's very similar to the acrylite in terms of you've got an aluminium shell. The shell on the Slinger is actually a ribbed aluminium shell, so it's slightly sort of textured, you can feel that.
Yeah.
It's an 8 lug, so again, same as the acrylite in terms of tuning. You've got these really nice sort of rounded over Slingerland stick chopper style hoops on, which I know they're only hoops, but they can actually add a lot to the sound.
They really do, they do.
I know on this drum yourself, you are a big fan of rim shots, rim clicks on this.
Yeah.
And I mean, what you've got there is probably about a centimetre of the rim sticking above the drum. So for a rim click, you've got a lot of space under the stick for a real strong rim click.
Definitely.
To power through.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the vintage drums we're looking at, this one has an internal muffler or tone control, as they're called in the UK.
But how useful are they?
They are possibly the most useful thing I've ever seen in drums, really. I mean, they started phasing out really in sort of the mid-80s, mid to late 80s. They started not becoming popular.
A mistake, I think.
A big mistake, yeah,
I think so. I agree.
I mean, it's a huge thing, obviously, the area of drum recordings and what you can do with drums were changing at that time.
Yeah.
With recording processes, so the drum didn't actually always have to sound like it was recorded.
That's
if that makes sense. But I'm a huge fan of these internal mufflers or tone controls, and it will literally save you hours and hours in the studio or on tour. If you're trying to tune your snare up and you've got a little ring, a little overtone or something that you can't get rid of, and perhaps you don't have time to get rid of it. Perhaps you've got,
time is an issue.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're playing a gig, you could be on stage in 2 minutes, you haven't got time to faff around with it. If you're in a studio, time is money, so the rest of the band probably don't want to see you faffing around with your snare drum for
moon gel and so on.
Totally.
So moon gel is a good thing.
Yeah. So again, internal sampler is a big, to me it's a big sale in vintage drums. Full stop. It's just something that a lot of modern ones don't have, and really they should. And
I mean, this drum I've used wide open as well, so meaning that the tone control completely off, the damper off, and a bit of a ring on the drum. And again, it depends on the music, like all of these things, and even modern drums, it depends on the style of music that you're playing. Of course, the work I'm doing in the studio is a whole gamut of styles, so I need these sort of colours in my palette when I'm painting my drumming strokes. So yeah, if you don't know this drum, check it out, because it's great. I mean, acrylite is a go-to drum, obviously, very good. But check this bad boy out. It's even a bit nasty. It's more funky sounding than an acrylite.
Bit of a wider range, I'd say.
I agree.
Acrylites are great, and acrylites are specifically known for being a dry-sounding snare drum. This will get you the dryness of an acrylite, but then a bit more.
It does.
You can get the brightness from that, which a lot of people struggle to get from an acrylite.
It's got a good sort of tone for funk with the rim shot, rim click for any ballad stuff or bossa novas and Latin stuff, jazz stuff. Nice with brushes as well. Not quite as responsive as some of the other drums we look at with brushes, but it is good. And it does tune down as well. So that's an interesting drum. That was kind of left field for me when I first saw that. This other one is going back to Ludwig. Ludwig is one of my go-to makes for vintage drums. This is another student model. This is a Pioneer, I believe, from 1968. I won't tell you the month, I think it's May. And this one has only got 6 lugs, hasn't it?
Yeah, 6 lugs, so a student model, which is great, really. I mean, we were speaking earlier about how people tend to associate the less lugs on a drum, i.e. a 6 lug 14-inch snare drum, with less quality and less sound sort of thing.
Yeah.
So a lot of beginner drums will have 6 lugs, so people just tend to assume that 6 lugs is a beginner drum sort of thing.
Yes.
That obviously is not the case at all, because this is a gorgeous drum, and with 6 lugs you actually get a bit more of an open sound than you do, I mean, even with 8, but obviously now it's quite popular for most snare drums to be 10 lug, or even 12 lug is becoming
quite popular.
known and popular, as it were. Whereas 6 lugs will give you an open sound. You're not choking the head. You're not putting an overt amount of tension on the head.
Yeah.
You're just letting the actual drum sing and sit nicely, really.
This drum sits really well, I find, if I'm looking for a Levon Helm type sound, that mid-range, so any singer-songwriter stuff that comes from that sort of time period when I'm referencing the tracks for a session, and it just sits there, and I tend to try and leave all these snares in the frequency that they feel comfortable, that I'm comfortable playing them in. Obviously this will go up and it will go down, but I tend to leave it in the tuning that it's set from the last session that sounded that way. It's in a Champagne Sparkle. It's a lovely drum. Again, don't be afraid of the student model drums. I have a jazz festival, which is like the older brother of this, which is 10 lug, isn't it?
8 lug.
8 lug.
Yeah.
And that's in White Marine Pearl, the sort of Buddy Rich finish. That's a lovely drum. Again, tunes up, tunes down, can do slightly more with it. But there's something about the character, and character is an important word when we talk about these vintage drums. The character of this drum, I can't seem to find in anything else. So the minute I actually got this from you again, wasn't it? I played it a few times, and it was just like, yep, that's for me. Again, internal damper, which means you get a very dry, clean sound very quickly. And if you let the snares off, you get a slight little rattle after the note. I mean, which you do with any snare, but with the sort of sound that I'm aiming for, that mid sound with this tuning, it just sounds superb. And something else that sounds superb. not a lot needs to be said about this bad boy. A Ludwig 400, industry standard. I'm not going to say too much about it. I bought this when I was with Susie, Susie Sue. It was my second snare. My first snare was a Sonal, because I was a Sonal endorser at the time. This is from 1969. A lot of my drums seem to come from the period 1965 to 1970. Don't know why, that was just before I was born in 70. But there's something about that, that later part of the 60s, I just love the drums from that era. So, I know all about this bad boy, but if you don't, Tris, tell them why this is the industry basic standard,
So again, industry standard, it's a hard one to call whether it's industry standard due to the amazing sound and quality, or whether it's due to, at the time, the artists that were playing it.
Yeah, that's true.
The 400 series just exploded during the time. You have a couple of people playing on it, and then it seemed that every drummer was like, yeah, that's the drum for me, I now play a Ludwig 400. It's the most recorded snare drum in history. It's appeared on countless albums, in terms of a snare that's just providing a backbeat, or a snare that is really driving the music, like Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen, which has a 400, which just opens it with that classic snare sound. So you've got the Lud alloy shell, which is an aluminium alloy. You've got the 10 lugs, which at the time, it's quite a lot of lugs on a snare drum. It just gives you that extra bit of tuning, especially in the high end. You're going at mid to high. I mean, this drum, it sounds great really at any tuning, but if you're in the mids or highs, this will just absolutely perform for you.
And it tunes down really well as well. If you put, you've got to moon gel it up a little bit, but it sounds really good low. It sounds like a Linn drum snare tuned right down. And I recorded something with it just last week actually that did that, and the artist was like, "My God, what the hell is that?" They thought it was some big deep 80s snare, and it was this bad boy just tuned down.
That's it.
Sounded absolutely awesome. I love it. I mean, I wouldn't leave home without it. And another quirky thing about these drums is they will detune occasionally, where the machining and stuff and things aren't probably as good as they are today, not as refined, and they don't grab as well.
Threads tend to get a bit worn over time and everything like that. I mean, a lot of them, things like worn threads and worn rods and stuff like that, can be replaced with sort of newer ones, but again, you're almost taking character away from the drum. If it's a used drum, as all your drums are,
absolutely.
You're using them live in studios, you want to get the sound out of them.
Yeah.
You want to keep that character.
I think
and I mean, you yourself aren't bothered by
no. This is pitted
to
hell, but it's been loved, and I think that's great. And I think all of the history of all of these drums have been loved by someone at some point, and I'm just the next person in the journey, and then they'll be handed to somebody else. God forbid, whenever that may be. But yeah, this is a fantastic drum, and I was going to say on the tuning point. You know, like you said, there's no point putting new. I don't believe in getting old stuff and putting all new things on it if I can avoid it. Some people re-drill and put other things on it. That's not my bag. That's not for me. So I'm quite happy that the sound man occasionally says, "I think you've lost a bit of tuning on your snare." Before we do the next take, and I'm like, yeah, fine, I'll tune it back up. Is that about right? They'll reference it. We'll get the drum dial out. Yeah, we're back again. I'll sooner have that than a characterless drum sound that just, you know, doesn't have any character about it. You know, these drums have got personality and they help me make my music. The last one is a bit of a straggler for me because this is a student Radio King, and I'll let Tris talk about it in a sec. I bought this in '96 when I was on tour with a band called Modern English. Went around all of America, and I got it from a shop in Milwaukee called Faust Music, which unfortunately isn't there anymore. I did some research. But I bought 4 snares from the man. I bought 3 Slingerland student models, a bit like this one here, and I bought this one. And this is the deepest one I've got in all of my vintage snares. And that's why, because it's got a bit of extra depth, different shell to the other ones, and it just gives me something a bit different and different hoops. So maybe you want to pick it up from there, because these hoops are funky, they're weird.
They are. So you've got the straight stick chopper hoops
stick chopper,
on this, so they are literally just a straight hoop. There's actually a flange on the bottom to sit on the head, but there's no top flange, so you're literally stick chopping, as it were.
And these bad boys here, these clips.
Yeah, you've got
got
the hoop clips to sit over the top just to pull it down, different to having the rods actually go through the hoop itself. Usually people tend to find the ones with hoop clips and the single flanged hoops a bit more precise to tune, as it were, ever so slightly more responsive, as it were, yeah. The only real difference between this and a Radio King is the fact that you haven't got the sort of the original Radio King strainer with the snare bridges and stuff like that, but the shell is effectively exactly the same. You've got the solid mahogany shell here, so this would be a late 50s student model Radio King. So a solid mahogany shell with solid maple RE rings, 8 lugs, nickel plated, and the 3-point strainer, which is very easy, great.
It's a great design.
This drum, unlike the Radio Kings, actually is interesting because it doesn't have an internal dampener, and is just, as you can see, just clean. So it'd be interesting to know if you actually use any dampening on this drum, if you feel you need to.
Again, like some of these other drums, sometimes wide open, depending on the material. Again, the music always dictates what we're going to need. But yeah, moon gel. You know, I never take gaffer to it or anything. Only a bit of moon gel. 2 pieces, 3 pieces sometimes. But again, that's covered a whole range of stuff. It's funny, you see that on the stand as a drummer, and you would instantly try and reference a style of music. And yet, if you heard in the live room, you go into the control room of the studio and listen back to the track, and you hear that snare in that music, in that environment, you wouldn't ever think about what it was anymore. So it's funny because with all of these, they get used on a number of different things. I've used this on some sort of light rock stuff, jazz stuff, obviously with brushes, and quite wide open as a New Orleansy type thing. So it does get used. But as I said to you, I haven't really. It's one of those. I do love it, and it's in my collection because it's a different sound. But yeah, I can't say it's. I always go to it straight away. I hear a certain track and think, it is that Radio King, but it's not one that I always dig out as I would these others, and of Jazz Festival, I must say. And of course, the other one we're not talking about today is obviously I'm a DW in Dawson. I've got 2 a 13x5 maple and a 14x7 maple shell, which takes care of a lot of the music styles that I play. But it might only be 80%. And the rest of the time I'm using these. And I openly tell the guys at DW, and most professional drummers do that. You know, sometimes you see them in the studio with a different snare than the one they perform live, and it's perfectly okay to do that. You know, I don't make any secret of. I always write to Garrison and Don and tell them that I've got these snares and I'm using them. And usually I say to them, "Can we make something that's like one of these snares?" You know, and there might be something in the pipeline there. I'm not going to say anything. Right, so there is my collection of my vintage snare drums. As I say, I'm always looking to add other sounds and dimensions of sound to my snare drum collection. But I hope you've enjoyed this little snippet. There'll be more to come. I'll probably do one on my 2 Ludwig kits at some point. So if you have any questions on these snare drums and their use and so on, then please write to me or my email address, robert.bryan70@gmail.com, or indeed you can write to Tristan at DrumAttic, which is...
You can contact me through 2 email addresses which are on my website, www.drum-attic.co.uk. The first one is Tristan at that website, and the second one is inquiries@drumattic.co.uk.
Brilliant. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.